What happens when the just security guy you cut from a German military delegation turns out to be the only one in the room who understands every word? What if the colonel across the table knows him from a past life, remembers what he did for their soldiers, and decides to speak through him instead of the CEO's daughter? How does a quiet veteran turn one arrogant insult into the moment that costs her a multi-million contract and her job without raising his voice once? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Daniel Keller, and most people at my company think I am just the man at the door. I wear a dark blazer with a small badge, I stand near the lobby scanners, and I say good morning more times in a day than I can count. People hand me their visitor passes, drop their eyes to their phones, and walk past like I am part of the furniture. I do not mind the uniform or the standing. I have spent enough years in boots and gear to appreciate a job where the worst hazard is a spilled coffee. What I do mind is when people mistake quiet for useless and gray hair for empty space. Our headquarters sits at the edge of the city, glass and steel rising above a dull strip of warehouses and parking lots. Inside, everything is polished. Screens on the walls show the company logo and sleek videos of our tech. A lot of people forget that none of that works if security is sloppy. They do not see the hours spent writing protocols, the drills, the watchful eyes on the cameras. Most days I am fine with that. My best work has always been invisible. That week, the building had more shine than usual. Posters in the lobby announced an important visit from a German military delegation. The internal emails called it a strategic partnership opportunity. On the screens, maps and numbers flashed, talking about multi-year contracts, secure systems, and joint development. For the executives, it was a chance to show off. For me and my team, it was a long checklist: access levels, route plans, emergency procedures, language notes, cultural details. I knew how these visits worked. I had helped organize them before many of the younger managers even joined the company. Early that morning, I arrived before the sun. The lobby lights were still half dim, and the cleaners were finishing their rounds. I walked the perimeter, checked doors, tested the metal detector, and reviewed the visitor list on the tablet. Names, ranks, positions. I recognized one name immediately: Oberst Marcus Weber. The memory hit me fast. Cold nights overseas, joint briefings, a tired man handing me a folder and trusting me to translate it correctly. He was not just some colonel to me. He was someone who had seen me do more than stand in a lobby. By 7:30, the building was awake. Staff streamed in, some nervous, some excited, most just trying not to spill their coffee. My team and I did our usual checks. I greeted delivery drivers in basic German, asked about their route, and got a couple of surprised smiles. It was nothing special to me. I picked up the language one long deployment at a time. But around here, people hear you speak something other than English and assume you learned it from a phrase app. Around 8, the energy shifted. The elevator doors opened, and Amelia Hale stepped out like she owned the air. She is the CEO's daughter and our Director of International Partnerships. She wears sharp clothes, high heels, and can make a whole hallway tense just by walking through it. When she was first given the role, people tried to be polite. They said things like that she was a fast learner and good with people. Over time, those comments faded. What stayed was her habit of talking down to anyone without a corner office. She came straight to the lobby with a small group of managers following like a trail. She glanced at the scanners, then at me. There was no greeting. She asked in a flat tone if my team understood the schedule and if we were up to speed for the German visit. I told her we had reviewed the security route, prepared badges, and updated our protocol sheets. I added quietly that I had worked with Oberst Weber before and that he valued clear communication and routine. I thought this might ease her mind, maybe even help her. It did not. She gave a little half smile, the kind people use when they think they are being patient with a child. She said she already had an interpreter arranged and that high-level discussions would be handled by the professionals. She added that my job was to stand by the doors, keep the hardware safe, and let the grown-ups handle the strategy. I felt the eyes of my team on me. Luis shifted his weight beside the scanners. A junior analyst by the elevator glanced down quickly. It was not the first time she had brushed me off, but the words left a sting that did not fade quickly. We moved on. I checked the radios, tested the panic buttons, and went over the arrival path again. On the monitors in the control room, we could see drivers doing practice runs outside. By 10, the lobby was spotless and ready. The German flag stood beside ours near the main doors. Someone had arranged them, so the colors lined up perfectly. It looked good. It also reminded me of days when flags meant more than marketing. When the delegation arrived, there was that usual mix of stiffness and politeness. suits, uniforms, briefcases, military posture. I stepped forward to greet them at the scanners, welcomed them, and gave simple instructions in German. They relaxed slightly when they heard their own language. One of the officers made a small joke about early meetings and strong coffee. I answered in kind. For a moment, it felt like old times. Then Amelia swept in. She moved between us with practiced ease, switching to English and turning up her smile. She thanked them for coming, said the company was honored, and gestured toward the elevators. She introduced herself with her full title, then motioned at me with a small tilt of her head. She told them that I was head of security on the floor and that I would handle doors and badges, while she and the executive team took care of the important discussions upstairs. The way she said security sounded like jacket check. Most of the visitors nodded politely. Marcus, standing slightly behind the others, frowned for half a second and looked at me more closely. His eyes had a question in them, like he was trying to match my face with a memory. I held his gaze for a moment and gave a small nod. There was no room here for our past. Not yet. The plan, as written, was simple. I would escort the delegation through the secure elevator, run them through a quick safety briefing in both languages, then stand by during the main presentation in the hotel conference suite across the street. The company had rented it for the formal demo and lunch. I had personally written the security notes for that space a week earlier. Every camera, every exit, every emergency route. It was my job to know the room better than anyone. But plans on paper are fragile things when pride is involved. As we moved toward the elevator, Amelia spoke quietly to one of the junior managers at her side. He nodded and then turned to me near the doors. He told me, gently but with a nervous smile, that Amelia had decided to keep non-essential staff in the building during the core meeting. He said that the hotel's own security team would be enough and that I could monitor things from here. I asked if this was a new protocol. I kept my voice calm. I did not argue, just asked. The junior manager looked uncomfortable and said it was Amelia's call. He added that she had said I was just security, and that having fewer bodies in the room would look more high level. He said it softly, like he knew the words were wrong but could not change them. My hands tightened on the folder I was holding, but I let out my breath slowly, so I stayed. I watched the elevator doors close on the delegation, Amelia, and the other managers. On the camera feed from the hotel's lobby, I saw them arrive, greeted by staff, ushered into the rented suite. I heard nothing, of course. The system only showed images, but some things do not need sound. On one monitor, I saw the interpreter they had hired standing by the screen with a folder. He looked unsure of himself. His suit was a little too tight, his eyes flicking between documents. On another screen, I saw the German officers exchange glances as he tried to follow their questions. Marcus's face tightened in that familiar way, the one I had seen when briefing officers got details wrong during operations. He leaned forward, repeated a point slowly, and the interpreter stumbled. Back in our control room, Luis watched with me. He said quietly that this looked rough. I could see what he meant. The body language was off. People shifting in chairs, hands spreading in a gesture of confusion. The CEO's daughter trying to talk over the gap with big hand movements and a bright expression. I felt a strange mix of frustration and detachment. This was exactly the kind of situation I had spent years training to prevent, and now I was watching it like a stranger with a remote. When the delegation finally returned to our building, the mood was different. They were still polite, but their faces had hardened. The small, relaxed smiles from the morning were gone. In the lobby, Amelia spoke fast in English, saying how productive the session had been, and how they were aligned on next steps. The officers nodded in that distant, closed way people use when they are already thinking about their report. As they headed out, Marcus hung back for a moment. He looked at me in a direct, searching way. Then he said something brief in German that the others could not hear clearly. It was a simple question: why I had not been in the room. I answered, also quietly, that there had been a change in plan and that I had been asked to remain on site. His jaw tightened just a little. He gave a short nod and followed his team out into the cold air. After they left, the building buzzed with nervous excitement. Some people said the meeting had gone fine. Others, the ones with sharper eyes, said the Germans seemed unimpressed. In the cafeteria, I heard someone say that Amelia had talked through most of the questions without really answering them, and that the interpreter had looked lost. But the official line in the emails that afternoon was predictable. Strong progress. High engagement. Promising signals. By the end of my shift, the lobby was quiet again. The flags still stood by the doors, their colors steady in the artificial light. I went up to the security control room to finish my reports. I wrote what I always write: times, locations, small incidents, nothing dramatic. I did not mention being cut from the meeting. It felt like one more insult on a long list, and I did not yet know what to do with it. I was about to log out when my phone vibrated on the desk. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. I picked it up, expecting a message from Luis or a late memo. Instead, I saw an unknown international number and a short line of text in clear, formal German. It used my name, my rank from years ago, and asked a simple question: why the man who kept our operation safe had been missing from the table today. I stared at the message for a long moment, letting the words settle. It was not just the language that hit me. It was the way he used my old rank, the one I had not heard out loud in years, except inside my own head. He wrote like he still saw me as part of his team, not as some anonymous guard in a lobby. My fingers hovered over the screen. For a second, I thought about answering right away and pouring out everything. Then the habits I had learned over a lifetime stepped in. I set the phone down, took a slow breath, and let the first rush of anger pass through me like a wave. On the train home that night, the world outside the window was a blur of lights and dark shapes. I sat with my phone in my hand and thought about the long road between who I used to be and who they thought I was now. Years ago, I had stood in dusty forward bases with Marcus and his people, translating orders and warnings, watching for small signals that could save lives. I had learned German the hard way, one mistake at a time, with serious faces watching me and trusting me anyway. Back then, no one called me just security. They knew exactly what my job meant. When I got to my apartment, I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and walked straight to the closet in the hallway. An old gray box sat on the top shelf. I took it down and set it on the kitchen table. The cardboard was worn at the corners. Inside were pieces of a life most of my coworkers had never heard about. Service patches, a folded flag, a few photos where I looked 10 years older and 10 pounds lighter than I do now. And letters. Some typed, some written by hand. I pulled out one letter with careful fingers. The paper had yellowed a bit. It was from Marcus, written after a long joint exercise where things had nearly gone very wrong. He had thanked me for staying calm when others panicked and for catching a translation error that could have put a patrol in danger. He had called me reliable and said his men trusted me. I traced the lines with my thumb. Those words had mattered then. Reading them now, after a day of being called non-essential, they cut in a new way, not because they hurt, but because they reminded me of the gap between the respect I had earned and the way I was treated now. I put the letter back and closed the box. I did not take pictures or send anything. There was no need. The proof was for me. I sat at the table with a cup of tea, replaying the day in my head, the way Amelia had talked in the lobby, the way the interpreter had stumbled, the way Marcus had looked at me at the doors, and that message, written like he could not understand why anyone would hide me. For a while, I blamed myself. Maybe I should have pushed harder to be in the room. Maybe I should have gone to the CEO directly. But the truth is, I already knew how that would have gone. This was not the first time I had been quietly pushed to the side. When Amelia first took her title, things were different. The board had wanted her to learn the ropes, so they paired her with people who actually knew what they were doing. I was one of them. I had walked her through our security briefings, explained how high-level visitors thought, and even helped her pick out small phrases in German and French so she could greet people properly. She seemed grateful at first. She asked questions, wrote notes, thanked me in a careful, formal way. Then the company had a visit from a small European team 2 years back. The interpreter they hired that time froze halfway through a technical explanation. There was a long, awkward silence. Without thinking, I stepped in. I explained the issue in the visitor's language, using the plain terms we had used in the field instead of the buzzwords on the slides. The room relaxed. The visitors nodded and started asking better questions. After the meeting, the CEO had clapped me on the shoulder and said he knew he could always count on the old guard. Amelia stood beside him, smiling like the win was hers. In the days that followed, she started referring to that visit as her personal success story. In emails, she wrote about how she had handled a last-minute interpreter failure and built trust with the guests. My name never appeared. When I saw the summary circulated to the board, it was as if I had not been in the room. At first, I let it go. I was used to that. In the military and in security, you learn that if things do not go wrong, your reward is silence. But something about the way she started talking about it later bothered me. She began to treat my skills like a backup tool she could pull out when she wanted to impress someone, then shove back into a drawer when she was done. Before another visit, she asked me to coach her on a few key phrases again. Then she told the marketing team that she had spent the year improving her language skills. When I tried to clarify a protocol in a planning meeting, she cut me off and said she did not need tactical lectures from operations staff. The room went quiet. I stepped back. The meeting moved on without me. Over time, the pattern became clear. When something went wrong, she looked to security to fix it. When something went right, she retold the story with herself at the center. And slowly she began to act as if she did not need the people who had built the systems she was now selling. Junior managers copied her tone. They started using phrases like frontline resources and support staff when they talked about us. They acted like decades of experience could be replaced by a few slides and a confident smile. The German visit was only the latest example. The difference this time was that someone on the other side of the table still remembered me, and he cared enough to ask why I was gone. That changed how the insult felt. It was no longer just about my pride. It was about truth. They had not only disrespected me, they had lied by omission to a partner who had trusted us. The next day at work, the building felt the same on the surface. The same polished floors, the same buzz of conversation. But underneath, the current had shifted. In the cafeteria at lunch, I heard small bits of talk about the German delegation. One person said the colonel seemed cold by the end. Another joked that maybe the translator used the wrong verbs. Someone else mentioned that the board had quietly asked for feedback. After years in this place, I knew what that meant. When the board got curious, something had gone wrong. That afternoon, I went to the security control room again. I had a few hours of desk work, incident reports, badge audits, footage spot checks. It was routine, but as I worked, my mind kept going back to the text message. I had still not replied. I knew I owed Marcus at least a short answer. I just was not sure yet what kind. Finally, I took out my phone and typed a simple response in German. I thanked him for his message. I said there had been internal decisions about who sat in the room and that I had been asked to stay on site. I kept it factual. I did not attack anyone. I ended by saying that I was still here if he needed clear answers about the building, the systems, or the people. He answered faster than I expected. He wrote that he understood internal politics, that he had seen that before in many countries. He added that he considered our past work together as proof of my reliability, and he asked if I would be present at any future meetings. I told him I hoped so, but that I did not control that. He replied with a short line that stayed in my head. He wrote that his team trusted people who showed up in the hardest places, not in the brightest rooms. I set the phone down and looked at the wall of monitors. Each small screen showed a different part of the building. Stairwells, lobbies, empty hallways, busy open spaces. I thought about all the times I had quietly stepped in to stop small problems before they grew. A visitor wandering near a sensitive area. A delivery with wrong paperwork. A junior employee letting someone tailgate through a door. Most of the time, no one important ever knew the danger had existed. That was the job. But somewhere along the way, people like Amelia had taken that invisible work as proof that we did not matter. Later that day, as I walked past the open plan office, I noticed more quiet stares than usual. Some people looked guilty, others curious. I could tell rumors were moving faster than emails. When executives are nervous, everyone feels it. On the far side of the floor, the glass wall of the CEO's office caught the light. Inside, I saw Richard pacing with a hand to his forehead, while Amelia sat at the small table, gesturing sharply. I kept walking until I reached the corner near his door. I did not mean to eavesdrop, but the door was partly open and certain words carried. I heard Amelia say that the German delegation had been thrown off by staff acting outside their roles. She said that if the board had any questions, she would explain that some internal people were stuck in old patterns and overstepping. She mentioned my name in that same soft, dismissive tone she used in the lobby. She said that after the contract was signed, she planned to restructure security, and that I would be moved into a more limited position or phased out to make room for a more modern profile. Richard did not argue much. I heard him say that he just wanted the contract and that she should keep things under control. He added that I had been around forever and that they would need to handle him carefully, like I was a piece of old equipment that needed to be stored gently. Hearing them talk about my future like that, as if I were a thing, not a person, made something inside me go still. I stepped back before they could see me. My heartbeat was steady. I did not slam any doors or make any speeches. Instead, I walked to the stairwell and took the steps down to the lobby one slow flight at a time. With each step, a thought settled in. For years, I had told myself that being useful was enough, that respect did not matter as long as the work was done. Standing there in that dim stairwell, with the echo of their words still in my ears, I finally understood I had been wrong. Respect was not a luxury, it was a line, and they had just crossed it. When I reached the landing between floors, my phone buzzed once more in my pocket. This time, it was not Marcus. It was an email notification from HR, inviting me to a brief meeting to clarify recent concerns regarding role boundaries the next day. I stared at the screen and felt the last piece of the pattern click into place. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For a few seconds in the dark, I forgot about the email from HR. Then the memory slid back into place like a file in a drawer. I lay there staring at the ceiling and listened to the quiet. In the past, a meeting like that would have filled me with dread. I would have gone over every little thing I had said in the last week and tried to guess what I had done wrong. This time, the feeling was different. The anger from the day before had already cooled into something harder. It was not rage, it was clarity. On the train, people scrolled through their phones and nodded off against windows. I watched our reflections in the glass. I thought about the words I had heard through the CEO's open door, about Amelia talking about phasing me out, about Richard wanting the contract more than he wanted to see people clearly. It had taken me years to reach a simple truth. I could not control how they saw me, but I could control what I accepted. At some point, staying silent becomes a kind of agreement. I realized I was done agreeing. At my stop, I got off and walked to the building. The air outside was cold and sharp. In the lobby, I did my usual checks: badges, scanners, quick greetings. I did not let my mood show. My team did not need to carry my weight. When the time on my watch matched the calendar invite, I headed upstairs to the HR floor. The carpet there was softer, the lights warmer. The whole place was designed to put people at ease. It never quite worked on me. Priya, our HR director, met me at the door of the small meeting room. She was in her usual neat suit, a folder in her hands. She greeted me by name and asked me to sit. Her voice was calm, but there was a tightness around her eyes I had not seen before. On the table in front of her was a printed copy of Amelia's complaint. I could see my own name in bold on the top page, even upside down. She explained that there had been concerns raised about my behavior around the German delegation. According to the report, I had been resistant to direction, visibly unhappy about being asked to stay downstairs, and potentially confusing to guests by engaging them in German without clear coordination. The words were carefully chosen, just sharp enough to stick, but vague enough to mean whatever someone wanted. As she read, I saw the pattern I had suspected. Amelia was trying to turn my quiet skills into liabilities. When Priya finished, she looked up and asked for my view. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply walked through the morning step by step. I described the arrival, the energy in the lobby, and my standard security briefing. I explained that speaking to visitors in their language is often the fastest way to build trust and keep things smooth. I noted that this had never been a problem in any previous visit. Then I described in plain terms how I had been told by a junior manager that I was just security and should stay in the building while the meeting moved to the hotel. Priya took notes. Every few minutes, she asked a short question, like she was trying to match two versions of the same story. She asked if I had ever been warned before about overstepping. I said no. She asked if I had ever been written up. I said no. She asked if I understood why the company needed clear roles. I said yes, and I added that I had followed every written protocol, right down to the line. The only new rule had been Amelia's decision to redefine what my role meant. At one point, I mentioned my history with German delegations in general. I told her that I had worked with them in the field before I ever joined this company. I said that some of their officers, including the current colonel, knew me by name and rank from those days. I did not wave any medals or letters in front of her. I simply stated the facts. I also said that after this latest visit, the colonel had reached out to me directly to ask why I had not been present. I saw something shift in her eyes when I said that. A little alarm went off in her head. She asked if I had any documentation of past positive feedback. I said yes, there were internal reports and external emails that mentioned me by name. I added that I was not trying to start a war. I told her I had no interest in embarrassing anyone, but I also told her, clearly and quietly, that I would not lie if our partners or the board asked what had actually happened. The room was very still when I said that. Priya closed the folder and rested her hands on it. She said the official purpose of the meeting was to clarify expectations and ensure everyone felt supported. It sounded like standard HR language, and some of it probably was. But then she did something small that mattered. She asked me to send her any neutral, factual documents I had that described my role in prior visits and my performance. She added that it was always useful to see the full picture before any further steps were taken. That was HR code for something else. She had seen enough to know this was not a simple attitude problem. When I left the room, I felt lighter than I expected. The same hallways, the same framed mission statements on the walls, but they no longer felt like walls that kept me locked in. On the stairs down to the lower floors, the words from the day before echoed again, but now they triggered a different thought. If they were planning to phase me out anyway, I had nothing to gain by playing the loyal ghost. I could either let them rewrite my story, or I could stand still and let the truth speak when it was asked for. I decided, right there between floors, that I was done covering for them. Later that day, I was walking through the parking level to check on a minor access issue when my phone buzzed in my pocket. The signal down there was weak, but the number lit up clearly. It was the same international code as the text from Marcus. I stepped into a corner where the concrete did not kill the call completely and answered. I will not repeat his exact words, but the meaning was simple. He was disappointed I had not been in the room. He said his team had prepared expecting to see me. He asked, in his direct soldier's way, if I had been demoted or sidelined. I told him, in plain terms, that there had been internal decisions about optics and roles, and that some people now saw security as background. I did not insult my own company. I did not make speeches. I just told him enough for him to understand that the problem did not come from him or his team. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said something that took me back years. He reminded me of a night during an old operation when a bad translation almost sent a patrol into danger. I had caught the error and stopped the briefing until it was fixed. He said he had never forgotten that. He said his people trusted me because when it counted, I did not try to look good. I just tried to keep them alive. Then he said he would be speaking with his ministry and with our board before any final agreement. He wanted to be sure the people in his line of sight were people he could trust. When the call ended, I stood in the half-dark of the garage and let the new piece of the puzzle click into place. I had been thinking of myself as small in this story, an older man at the edge of a big contract. But from Marcus's side, I was not a piece of furniture. I was part of his risk calculation. His recommendation to his ministry would carry weight. If he chose to speak up, the board would listen. For the first time, I saw my position clearly. My leverage was not a title or an office. It was trust built far away from this polished building, in places where outcomes had real weight. That night, after my shift, Luis asked if I wanted to grab a drink at the small bar a block away from the office. It was a place where staff sometimes went to decompress. Nothing fancy, just a long counter, soft music, and cheap food. We sat in a corner booth where the noise from the TVs was a low hum. He asked how the HR meeting had gone. I told him it had been calm. I said they had heard me out. I did not share every detail, but I did say that I was done pretending everything was fine. Luis leaned forward and lowered his voice. He told me that Amelia had already pushed 2 other senior staff out of her way in the last year. One had been moved to a special project that never went anywhere, then quietly laid off. Another had been written up so many times for negativity that he finally quit. He said people in operations were nervous, but they also were tired of watching the same pattern. He looked at me and said that if things ever came to a head, I would not be alone. I listened, took another sip of my drink, and made him one promise. I said that if anyone in real authority asked me what was happening, I would tell them the truth. I would not hide mistakes to protect feelings. I would not sign anything that turned lies into official history. His shoulders dropped a bit when he heard that. It is surprising how much relief you can give someone just by promising you will not quietly cooperate with wrongdoing. When I got home, I did not turn on the TV. I sat at my small kitchen table, opened my laptop, and logged into my work account. I did not break any rules. I did not download confidential files. I simply opened past emails and reports that involved me. There were delegation feedback forms with my name on them. There were internal thank you notes from project leads. There were old messages from before Amelia's promotion where executives called me our key link and trusted liaison for foreign partners. I created a folder and started dragging copies of relevant documents into it. Not personal data, not sensitive technical files, only items that described my role, my work, and the way the company had valued me before it became convenient to forget that. I did not know yet if anyone would ask to see them, but I knew that if they did, I wanted the record ready. I wanted more than my word. I wanted receipts. The next morning, I came in early again. The building was quiet, the sky still gray. I went straight to the security control room to run the usual system checks: cameras, alarms, access points. As part of that, I decided to print a short set of security notes and a summary of past delegation feedback to review later with HR if needed. I sent the print command to the old laser printer in the corner and turned back to the screens. A few seconds later, the printer woke up with a loud whir. Paper started sliding out in a steady rhythm. At first, it was the 2 pages I expected. Then it kept going. Page after page, thick with text and company headers, rolled into the tray. I frowned and walked over. The printer had reached back into the archive queue and was suddenly pushing out a whole stack of old incident reports and visitor feedback forms, including several from early German visits. At the top of one page, in bold letters, I saw my own name and a line of praise I had forgotten about. The machine kept spooling like it had been waiting years to throw these memories back into the light. The stack of paper in the tray grew until it almost spilled over. I hit the cancel button on the printer, but it kept working for a few more seconds, finishing whatever job had been sleeping in the queue. When it finally went quiet, I pulled the pages into a neat pile and started to flip through them. At first glance, they were just old reports, visitor logs, incident summaries, routine feedback. Then I noticed how often my own name appeared in the lines. It was like someone had taken the invisible parts of my career and printed them in black and white. One sheet was from a visit 5 years ago. A European tech delegation had come to review our pilot systems. The note at the bottom said the guests had felt safe and clearly supported by Mr. Keller, whose language skills and calm presence were vital during a tense schedule. Another page was an internal incident review, where a miscommunication with a foreign team had been prevented by timely intervention from security lead Keller. There were more, small paragraphs that had meant almost nothing at the time because the visits had gone well and everyone moved on. Seeing them now, all together, they formed a pattern I could not ignore. I gathered the most relevant pages and sorted them into 2 piles, one for external feedback, one for internal reports. I did not highlight anything. I did not write angry notes in the margins. I simply folded the top corners and slipped them into a simple manila folder. No labels, no dramatic names, just paper and ink telling a quiet truth. When I finished, I slid the folder into my bag, not to wave around, not to threaten anyone, but to have ready if someone asked me to justify my place. Around noon, an email went out to management and some senior staff. I was not on the original list, but Luis forwarded it to me fast, with a short message that just said, "You should see this." It was from the CEO's assistant. The subject line was, "Follow-up Strategic Review, German Partnership." The body said there would be a board-level strategy session in 3 days to discuss alignment, risks, and next steps regarding the delegation and future cooperation. It mentioned that selected operational leads would be invited to provide context. The last line said that the board wanted complete transparency about the visit. I read it twice. The words were polite, but they carried weight. When a board asks for complete transparency, people start choosing their sentences carefully. I knew Amelia would see this as both a threat and an opportunity. If she could spin the story in her favor, she might cement her position. If she failed, she could lose more than just pride. In that kind of meeting, reputations change in 1 hour, sometimes for years. Half an hour later, Priya from HR called my extension and asked if I could stop by her office briefly. Her voice was calm, but she skipped the usual small talk. When I walked in, she had her laptop open and that same folder from our last meeting beside it. She told me in that careful HR tone that the board had requested input from multiple departments, including security. She said my name had come up repeatedly in external references and internal notes about past visits. She added that the board wanted to hear directly from me about protocol, not just from the leadership layer. For a second, I almost laughed. After years of being treated as background, someone had finally followed the paper trail the printer had thrown at me. Instead of laughing, I nodded once. I asked what they expected from me in that meeting. She said they wanted a factual account of how we normally handle high-level visits, how this one differed, and whether any changes had introduced risk. She stressed the word factual. She also reminded me, gently, that the company valued professional tone. That was her way of asking me not to turn it into a personal attack. I told her I did not need to attack anyone. The facts would stand on their own. I said I would bring a brief timeline and references to relevant protocols. I did not mention the printed feedback pages yet. There was no need. One step at a time. As I stood to leave, Priya hesitated, then said something she probably had not planned to say out loud. She told me that, in her view, it was better for everyone if the people who actually knew what they were doing had a chance to speak clearly before decisions were made. It was as close to open support as someone in her position could give. Back in the control room, I sat in front of the wall of monitors and began to sketch out a simple outline on a notepad. No speeches, no long stories, just key points. How security briefings used to work for foreign delegations, how we integrated language skills and cultural knowledge, how we coordinated with executives and interpreters. Then, on the other side, how this latest visit had changed that pattern. Who decided I should stay behind? What the actual effect had been in the room, as far as visible body language and efficiency? It was a map, nothing more. But maps can show cliffs if you draw them honestly. That evening, after my shift, I stopped at a small grocery store on the corner near my apartment. As I picked up a few things for dinner, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked the screen. It was a new email, this time from an address I did not recognize at first. The domain belonged to the German Defense Ministry. The subject line mentioned clarification of liaison roles. I opened it right there in the aisle between canned goods and cleaning supplies. The email was polite and official. It did not attack the company. It simply asked who, moving forward, would be the primary security and communication point of contact for joint visits. It referenced me by name and mentioned my past service and previous cooperation with German units. It said that for future trust, they wanted to be sure that people with proven experience would not be excluded from key discussions for optical reasons. The message was addressed to our CEO and copied to the board liaison. I was one of several recipients. In other words, it was now impossible to pretend I did not matter. I did not reply. It was not my role to answer that email directly. But as I stood there with a basket in my hand, the situation came into sharp focus. This was no longer about my feelings or Amelia's ego. Our partners had quietly raised a flag, and they had done it in writing. The board would see that, so would legal. So would anyone with a serious interest in the company's future. I had not pulled that lever. They had. My part was simply to tell the truth when asked. 2 days before the board meeting, Amelia came down to the lobby. It was early afternoon, and the place was quiet. She did not come alone. A junior manager and someone from PR walked beside her. Their steps were slower than usual, as if they were rehearsing lines in their heads. She stepped up to my desk and gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes. She asked how things were going in security. She asked if my team felt heard. It was a strange question after everything that had happened. Then she said she had heard I would be present at the strategic review as a support voice. She emphasized the word support, like she needed to remind herself I was supposed to stay in the background. She said she trusted that I would align with the company narrative and avoid confusing the board with operational detail. It was the most direct attempt at steering I had seen from her. She was not stupid. She knew the stakes. I waited until she finished. Then I told her calmly that I would answer any question the board asked me truthfully. I said I would focus on facts, timelines, and written protocols. I added that I had no interest in shaming anyone. My job had always been to reduce risk, not increase it. She nodded tightly. For a moment, I saw something like fear flicker in her eyes, quickly covered by annoyance. She said she hoped we were on the same team. I said the only team I had ever been on was the one that told the truth about what happened on the ground. After she left, Luis walked over from the scanners. He had watched the exchange from a distance. He asked what that was about. I told him just enough, that there would be a board meeting, that security had been asked to speak, and that I would be honest. He let out a slow breath and said that whatever happened, people downstairs would remember it. Then he glanced at the control room and joked that maybe we should hide the printer so it did not decide to spit out more ghosts at the wrong moment. The humor was thin, but it helped cut the tension. The night before the meeting, I slept less than usual, but not from anxiety. My mind was busy sorting memories, like files on a desk, and times I had stepped in quietly, times I had kept silent when others took credit, times I had watched good people pushed aside for being too blunt or too old or too unwilling to flatter. I saw the pattern clearly now, not just in my own story, but in the company as a whole. It liked the image of strength more than the work of actually being strong. In the morning, I put on my usual uniform, but I added one small thing. Inside my bag, beside my lunch and water bottle, I placed the folder with printed feedback and reports. I did not plan to open it unless someone asked a direct question about my credibility, but it felt right to carry it. A quiet reminder that I was not just a man in a blazer at the entrance. There was a record, even if some people had tried to forget it. The board meeting was scheduled for 11. Around 10:45, I took the elevator to the top floor. The hallway outside the boardroom was lined with framed photos of milestones and smiling executives. Deals closed, awards given, partnerships signed. I walked past them with steady steps. Near the door, the CEO's assistant waited with a tablet in her hand, checking off names as people went in. When she saw me, she gave a small, respectful nod and opened the door wider. Inside, the room was all glass and wood. A long table, high-back chairs, screens on the walls, water glasses lined up like soldiers. Board members sat in their seats, some reading documents, others scrolling through tablets. Amelia sat near Richard, her posture rigid, a stack of papers in front of her. Priya was at the far end of the table, laptop open. There was an empty chair halfway down on one side, with a printed name card that simply said, Daniel Keller, Security Operations. Seeing my name on that card did something strange in my chest. It was a small thing, but after years of being invisible, it felt like a line being redrawn. I took my seat, placed my folder by my leg, and folded my hands on the table. Richard cleared his throat and began speaking. He thanked everyone for coming. He outlined the goal of the meeting. He said the board wanted an honest assessment of the German delegation visit and any misalignments. He added that external partners had raised questions about staffing and competence, and he wanted those concerns put to rest. As he spoke, one of the board members tapped a printed copy of the email from the German ministry with a finger. Then the board chair, a woman who rarely visited the lower floors, turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were sharp and tired in the way of people who have seen too many polished presentations. She said they had heard my name many times in both positive and negative contexts over the last week. She asked me to walk them through how things were supposed to work that day and what, in my professional view, had actually happened. The room went quiet. Even the air conditioning sounded loud. As I opened my mouth to speak, my phone vibrated once in my pocket. I did not take it out, but the timing was close enough to feel like a small electric jolt under the table. The board chair noticed the movement and gave a half smile, then said we would all have time for calls later. She gestured for me to continue. Outside the glass windows, the city moved as always, unaware that a quiet shift was about to begin in this spotless room. I took a slow breath and began with the simple things. I told them what my job actually was, not just what it looked like from the lobby cameras. I explained how, for high-level visits, security usually works hand-in-hand with executives and operations. I described the standard pattern we had used for years: advanced checks, clear briefings in both languages, coordinated seating, fallback plans if translators struggled. I kept my voice steady and my sentences short. I did not tell a story about myself. I just drew a line from protocol to practice. Then I walked them through the German visit. I said that on that morning I had followed procedure. I was present in the lobby. I welcomed the delegation. I used basic German to give them simple instructions and ease their nerves, the same way I had done on many other visits. I pointed out that this had never been a problem before. In fact, it was part of the reason some partners trusted us. I said that later a change had been made. I was told I would not accompany the group to the hotel conference suite, even though that had been the written plan. A board member with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses leaned forward and asked who had made that change. I answered directly. I said the instruction had come through a junior manager, but he had told me it was at Amelia's request. I repeated his words as I remembered them, without adding any color, that I was just security, that fewer bodies in the room would look more high level. I kept my tone completely even as I said it. The words themselves did the work. Around the table, I saw a few jaws tighten. Amelia shifted in her seat. She said that in fast-moving situations, leaders needed flexibility. She claimed she had made a quick call to streamline the room and avoid crowding the table. She suggested that perhaps I had misread her long-term vision, that I was used to old models and had difficulty adjusting when things changed. She said it all in a smooth, confident voice. If I had been younger, maybe I would have shrunk in my chair. But I had heard that tone in other uniforms, in other rooms, and I knew what it was. A cover layer. The board chair raised a hand and stopped her gently. She turned back to me and asked a follow-up. She wanted to know whether the change had been documented anywhere. A memo, an updated protocol note, an email, anything. I said no. As far as I knew, the written plan still listed security as present in both locations. The only record of the change was a hurried sentence in a lobby hallway. Another board member asked about the interpreter. He had heard informal reports that there had been confusion in the room. I answered carefully. I said I was not in the hotel suite, so I would not pretend to know what was said, but I had watched the live video feed from our control room. I described what body language I had seen: hesitation, repeated questions, tightened faces. I said that when language breaks down in a negotiation, it can look small from outside, but it builds quiet doubt in the people watching. That doubt is hard to erase later. One of the board members flipped through his folder and tapped a page. He said they had received strong feedback from the German side, praising my past work. He asked how many years I had been handling foreign delegations. I told him. He raised his eyebrows slightly and asked how long Amelia had held her current title. She answered that herself. It was a much smaller number. The comparison sat in the air. No one said the obvious thing, but everyone saw it. I did not bring up the email from the ministry by name. That was already in their hands. I did not repeat what Marcus had said on the phone. That was between him and me. Instead, I kept returning to 2 points. First, that security had clear written protocols for these visits, built on years of experience. Second, that on this occasion, those protocols had been quietly overridden by someone who did not fully understand what she was cutting out. Amelia tried another angle. She said that if partners had concerns, it might be because certain staff were sending mixed signals, holding private conversations and stirring doubts. It was an indirect shot at me. The board chair looked at me again and asked one clean question. Had I contacted the German delegation first, or had they reached out to me? I answered honestly. They contacted me. I did not seek them out. I only replied when they asked about my absence. She wrote something down and then moved on. After a while, the questions shifted. They asked about past visits that had gone well. I gave quick examples. A French cybersecurity team, a Scandinavian procurement group, a smaller German delegation from years back. I explained how we had handled them, how we had mixed executive presence with strong ground support, and how that balance had built trust. As I spoke, I could feel the room's attention settle. Not on my face, but on the shape of the work. They were starting to see the pattern too. When they seemed done, I stopped talking. Silence filled the room for a moment. Then the board chair thanked me for my clarity and asked me to wait outside while they spoke with others. I nodded, picked up my folder, and left the room without looking at Amelia. In the hallway, the CEO's assistant gave me a small, sympathetic smile and pointed to a chair against the wall. I sat down and listened to the faint murmur of voices through the door. The minutes stretched. People walked past with laptops tucked under their arms, trying not to stare. At one point, Priya stepped out briefly to ask a question about a date on an old report. I answered and watched her go back in. The whole thing felt strange. I had spent years standing still at doors, invisible by design. Now I was sitting at one, very visible, while the people inside the glass room tried to decide what to do with the truth they had just heard. After what felt like an hour, the door opened again. The board chair stepped out. Her expression was neutral, but there was a new firmness to it. She told me they were not making any immediate decisions in that session. She said they would be speaking directly with the German colonel and his ministry in a joint call within a few days. She added that they wanted me present for that conversation as an operational witness, in case any technical questions came up. She stressed that I would not need to argue for myself. They just wanted facts. I said that facts were all I had. When I went back downstairs, Luis met me in the control room. He asked how it had gone. I told him they were still talking, that there would be a call with the Germans, and that I had been asked to sit in. He whistled softly and said that if the board was bringing foreign officers into a call, things were serious. He asked if I was scared. I told him the truth. I said I felt strangely calm. There comes a point when you have said what you need to say. After that, fear does not have much to hold on to. In the days before the call, the building's mood shifted again. Amelia moved faster in the halls, more clipped in her speech. She sent out emails about tightening communications and aligning external messaging. She called small meetings with her direct reports behind closed doors. Some of them avoided my eyes afterward. Others came by my desk with small, wordless nods. I did not ask them what she had said. I already knew the shape of it. In her mind, she was fighting for control. In mine, I was done fighting. I was simply holding a line. Priya met with me once more, not in a formal room this time, but at a small table near the HR floor window. She told me the date and time of the call. She said legal would be present, as well as 2 board members and the CEO. She reminded me again that all I needed to do was answer questions about process. She did not tell me what to say. She knew she did not have to. At the end of the conversation, she hesitated, then said something soft. She said that however this ended, some people in the company were glad I had not stayed silent. The night before the call, I opened the old gray box on my kitchen table again. Not to take anything with me the next day, but to remind myself who I had been before this building, before these badges and scanners. I looked at the letter from Marcus, at the faded photographs, at the patches sewn crookedly onto fabric. All of it told the same story. I had spent my adult life in places where truth and competence were not decorations. They were the difference between going home and not going home at all. Remembering that put everything into scale, a boardroom, a call, a contract. Important, yes, but not everything. In the morning, I arrived early as always. The lobby lights glowed on the polished floor. The flags that had stood by the door for the German visit were gone now, rolled up somewhere in storage. It made the place look a little emptier, like the building itself was holding its breath. I checked the cameras, the doors, the basic systems. Routine did what it always does. It steadied me. 10 minutes before the call, I took the elevator up to the top floor again. This time, the hallway outside the boardroom was even quieter. Fewer people, more tension. Inside, the table was set up with a large screen at one end, facing the chairs. A video conferencing system sat ready, little green lights blinking. The CEO sat with his shoulders tight. 2 board members flipped through printed documents. Legal sat with a notepad and an unreadable face. Amelia sat farther down the table than before, her back straight, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. There was a chair set aside near the screen with my name card again. I took my seat, placed my folder by my leg, and folded my hands. No one made small talk. The board chair gave a brief overview of the agenda. She said the call with the German side was to clarify their concerns and to realign expectations. She said the goal was to restore trust, but that this required full honesty from all sides. As she finished, the conferencing device on the table gave a soft series of chimes. The big screen at the end of the room lit up with the logo of the German ministry, then shifted to a connection window. A small text box appeared in the corner with the colonel's name and a timer counting up as the system tried to establish the link. In the quiet room, every tiny sound from the speakers seemed loud. The camera light above the screen flicked from red to green, and the faint outline of faces began to form on the display as the call connected. The screen finished sharpening, and I saw Marcus in a simple office, wearing his uniform, sitting beside two other officials. There was no smile on his face, only a kind of steady attention that I remembered from our field days. He greeted the room and said he appreciated that the board had taken his concerns seriously enough to invite him directly. His German came fast and clear. The interpreter on our side started to speak, but within a few seconds, Marcus switched into English himself, slow and careful, so no one could pretend they had not understood. He explained that his team had prepared for the visit based on years of cooperation with certain individuals in our company. He mentioned my name and said they had expected to see me in the meetings because I had handled previous operations with calm and precision. He said that when they arrived and realized I had been left in the lobby, they were surprised. When the interpreter struggled, they were more than surprised. They were concerned. He said that from their perspective, it felt as if image had been chosen over competence. That was not how his ministry liked to work. The board chair asked him what impact this had on their view of the potential partnership. Marcus did not raise his voice. He said his internal report had recommended a pause. He said trust was not only about technology or numbers. It was about seeing that the right people were allowed to do their jobs. He added that future cooperation would require clear, written confirmation of who held operational responsibility, and that his ministry preferred to work with people whose reliability had been tested in real situations, not just in presentations. One board member asked directly about Amelia's role. Marcus chose his words as if they were tools on a table. He said he had received the impression that certain leaders were more focused on branding and personal visibility than on understanding actual risk. He mentioned that when he had tried to ask specific security questions, they had been redirected to generic talking points. He finished by saying that this did not match the serious image the company had once had in his eyes. Legal then confirmed that the ministry's written summary matched what Marcus had just said. They had it on record. Praise for my past work, concern about recent changes, and a recommendation to reconsider the structure of our team before any agreement. The chair thanked Marcus and his colleagues, said the board would respond formally, and ended the call. The screen went dark, leaving our own faces reflected in the black glass. For a long moment, no one spoke. When the silence finally broke, it was the board chair who spoke first. She said the situation was not about hurt feelings. It was about risk, governance, and the company's reputation with serious partners. She turned to Richard and said leadership decisions had weakened a long-term relationship. Then she turned to Amelia and listed the pattern they had found: quiet restructuring of experienced staff, complaints about being sidelined, now external concern that core expertise was being cut from the room. Her tone stayed calm, but the words landed like locked doors. They asked me if I had anything to add. I said only that protocols existed for a reason, and that, in my experience, every time someone removed the boring part of a safety system to make a cleaner picture, they created hidden cracks. I said I had no wish to see the company fail. I wanted it to remember what had made it strong in the first place. That was all. The board chair nodded once and said they had heard enough. She asked me to step outside again while they discussed personnel actions. I left my folder under the chair and walked out into the bright hallway. This time, I did not sit. I stood by the window and watched the street far below, people crossing at lights, cars stopping and starting, the ordinary world moving on, while a few words in a quiet room shifted futures. After some time, the door opened. Amelia came out first. Her face was pale, her eyes hard and glossy. Priya walked beside her, carrying a thin packet of papers. I did not need to hear the details. I knew the shape of exit documents when I saw them. Amelia glanced at me, just once, with a look that mixed anger and disbelief, like she still could not accept that a man she had called just security had become the line between her story and the truth. Then she turned away and followed Priya down the hall toward HR. The board chair called my name from the doorway. When I stepped back into the room, there were fewer people at the table. She told me the board had decided that for any future cooperation with the German ministry, my position as security and liaison lead would be written directly into the agreement. She said they expected me to help rebuild the trust that had been damaged, and that my authority in those matters would be formal, not informal. I listened, then said I would do the work the same way I always had, quietly, carefully, and with respect for the people who depended on us. Later, back in the lobby, I watched as Amelia walked toward the turnstiles with her small box of personal items. She lifted her badge to the reader. The light stayed red. She froze for a second, then looked up to see me at the desk. Our eyes met across the polished floor. I did not smile. I only reached out and pressed the manual release to let her pass one last time. The gate opened with a soft click, and she stepped through into the street, leaving the building and her title behind. The glass doors slid shut, and in the reflection, for the first time in a long time, I saw myself not as a shadow at the edge, but as the man standing between this place and the consequences it had almost chosen,